Good morning. It is Sunday morning. About ready to go out and get something to eat. Let me see if I can adjust this camera a little bit or move it back. So you're hearing new talks about lockdowns. There was a recently admitted Biden organization. They is going to be reintroducing mask mandates and the C-19 protocol for basically lockdowns and keeping people from moving. And this is going to come, from what I read, was in mid-September. Now, of course, we're going to be entering into a new winter season. Nobody really cares about doing all that stuff and C-19 and all that stuff. And so people, of course, are asking, oh, are people going to believe this? It has nothing to do whether people are going to believe it. It's more about the businesses, right? Living under communism, the government owns everything, right? So to start a business, you got to ask the government. If you want to be any sort of a service person, you want plumbing, electrical, etc., right? You need a license, right? Who do you get that from? You get that from the government. You want to go to school for any of these things? If you can't afford for it, who do you got to ask money from? You're going to ask money from the government. And the government, of course, can lock you down and shut your business whenever they realistically feel like it. And this is what it's like living under communism. Now, globally, we live under a socialist system with the people at the tops, in essence, living under communism. They control all the assets, and you get socialism for the people. The government robs the people. Globally, you have America stealing labor from all these other different countries. This is why during, when America destroyed the pipeline, they sold natural gas to Europe for 5 times what it was going on the market, well above what they were paying from Russia. And it was because basically Germany was dragging their feet about when they were gonna stop buying LNG during this war. And of course, America got tired of waiting for them, and they basically destroyed the pipeline and took Germany's ability to get cheap gas from Russia. Anyway, with that said, I talked about this. This happened last year, where the Joe Biden administration, the transport, I believe it was transport. No, it was the energy. It was the energy official for the Joe Biden administration, and it was when oil prices were very high. We're talking close to or over $100 a barrel, and they said, obviously everybody was worried about gas going to $10 in places like California. And so they started dumping oil from the strategic reserve. And of course, this is naturally going to bring prices. This is actually going to help to bring oil prices down as you're dumping oil on the market. But it was the amount of oil. They dumped 50 million barrels of oil. And of course, during this interview, I wish I could find it, where the reporter states to the energy person, it's a lady with blonde hair. Maybe I'll flash her across the screen so you can see what I'm talking about. And he says to the person, are you gonna dump it all at once? Are you gonna break it up over time? And she's like, oh, I don't have the details over that. And he's like, well, how much is it gonna fall? How much do you think gas is gonna fall? Because Biden kept saying, oh yeah, the price of gasoline is gonna fall, no problem, don't worry about it. And they're like, well, how can you guarantee this? Because it's traded on the global market. So then the gentleman, the reporter, says to the person, do you know how much America uses on a daily basis? Do you know how much oil America uses? You're dumping about 50 million barrels that you say is going to drop the price of gas. And then she says, I don't have the exact details. And he's like, well, let me tell you. He's like, because I know how much we use. He says, we roughly use about 22 million barrels a day. And you're dumping 50 million barrels. And you're telling me the price is going to come crumbling down? He's like, how is that going to happen? She's like, I can't get into the details, but mark my words, the price of gas is going to come down. And not too long after that, about that same week, was when they announced Omicron variant and that countries were going to lock down. So what you're watching was not What you were watching was not a war on a virus. It had nothing to do with health, but it had everything to do with waging economic warfare. Because what happens when you lock down multiple countries, right? If all these Western countries just lock down, what happens to the amount of oil that is being used? Comes down. People are traveling less. They're going to bring back mask mandates. People are not going to want to travel with masks. If the government says we need you to restrict the amount of flights, the companies will do it because they're forced to. There's nothing that the companies can do. And so if they start utilizing restrictions and all these businesses, what are the cities going to do, right? And most of these cities that are run by the Democrats, what are they going to do? They're going to institute restrictions on how many people can go in, etc., right? Regardless of whether you have a jab or not, because they're just going to say, oh, this new variant goes through whatever, you need a booster, etc. Because what you're watching is economic warfare taking place because the price of oil is still very high. And America wanted originally to bring the price. This is why they were saying that they were going to buy back oil to refill the strategic reserve. But they wanted to do it below 70. And oil right now is trading above 80. And we're not even in wintertime yet. So naturally, oil is going to move higher. And America is experiencing more inflation, even though they're saying that they're not. And of course, they're gaslighting people, saying, "Oh, China's collapsing. China's, they're losing money, and Evergrande is collapsing." And all this is irrelevant. People are saying, "China is selling bonds. China is selling bonds, and they're strapped for cash, and it has nothing to do with that." What you're watching economic warfare. And so they're gaslighting the people of in Russia, or they're saying about Russia, "Oh, the ruble is collapsing." And I said, well, oil prices came down, and for the most part, the ruble is pegged to oil, and that's what Russia almost overwhelmingly sells. They sell oil. So what they want to do is they want to bring the price of oil down, but they can't. And Saudi Arabia is not listening to them, and many of these other countries are not. And the amount of oil that is being used, right? Even though they're saying, oh, you need to go away from oil, you need to go use solar panels, it's all bullshit. Because as more countries are basically industrializing and they want access to energy, one of the ways that the government is basically gaslighting these smaller countries to keep them impoverished is by saying, oh, what you need to do is you need to use less oil. You need to use natural gas. Oh, you can't burn coal. Coal is dirty. It's dirty for the environment. And we have climate agendas that you have to meet. We have goals that you need to meet. And all the purposes of doing it is when you're an advanced economy, and this is how the Civil War partially was started, where you had the North and the South that both were utilizing slavery. But the North gaslit the South and said, "Oh, slavery is illegal. We're free up here," even though they still had slavery in the North, in the northern part of the United States. But they were advanced economically, industrializing by comparison to the South. And so when multiple countries were utilizing slavery, it's just like Age of Empires, right? The countries in the empire that advances economically faster can then turn around, and what they did to get there, they can then virtue signal and say that's wrong. Why? Because it hinders you from getting to where they are. And so certain countries used slave labor. Once they industrialized, they released all these slaves, and now they became workers, so that they can sell products, because they were already industrialized. They didn't need them to build the infrastructure. The infrastructure is there. Then they can gaslight all these other countries and virtue signal about how terrible slavery is. It has nothing to do with that. Just like what you're watching with the virus has nothing to do with the virus. Overwhelmingly, you're watching economic warfare being waged between countries. This was why during Brexit, you can go back and look this up, and I talked about this. During Brexit, Angela Merkel was negotiating with then the Prime Minister, Boris, what's his name? I forget his first name. Anyways, the guy for the UK president. And during their negotiations, they're like, oh, we have to stop negotiations because this was when they had the Delta variant. And India, they called it the India variant at first. And then during Brexit, they said, oh, we can't export or import any of your stuff until you deal with this new strain. And this is what was being watched. This is what was being done during that time, where nations were using the excuse of a new variant as an excuse to wage economic warfare. We can't do business with you. I'm sorry. You have a new variant. Come back, when you've dealt with it. And this is all under the guise of health, but it has nothing to do with health. It's just you have certain countries that are not able to economically compete with many of these other countries, and this is just because they export. All of their jobs are basically in manufacturing are exported. So the people who do the manufacturing, after a while you get bold. You're like, shit, you need us. We're the ones that supply all your stuff. And then the West is like, well, shit, you need us because we're the ones that give you access to all of our people, and we control the dominant currency. So there's a mutual benefit, and so you get the butting of heads. But now you have places like China and Russia that are like, well, we're going to start our own thing. We're going to do business outside of the dollar. So to try to bring these people to market, because overwhelmingly all the commodities are being sold on the system that is run by the West. Now, of course, Asia and Russia are developing their own. They're developing their own system where America will not have the ability to manipulate the prices for these currencies, because these countries can create dollars out of thin air, right? If you needed a product, right? I have like a phone here, right? I can have my own people in my own country build this, and it'll be more expensive because the standard of living is higher. Or I can do it in a third world country for pennies on the dollar, dollars that I create out of thin air, and I give my people a higher standard of living at the expense of these people over here. And this is basically what goes on in the global economy, how America basically robs the labor of many of these other countries. This is what happens with NATO. This is what Europe is. Europe is basically a vassal to the United States, and they all have to pay tribute. This is the whole point of the NATO agreement, where these countries dedicate over 2% of their GDP, and they have to donate it for war. And on top of that, they have to have all of these bases. And this is what early colonialism looked like as to how America had a foothold in these countries. Basically how America was able to dominate Europe with the assistance of the UK. And this is just basically, so you're going to see more of this. It has nothing to do with health or a new variant. They just need the people overwhelmingly to follow the propaganda, and they need the businesses to go along. And most of the businesses, the large big businesses, are owned by small groups of people. And this is basically what we're going to see moving forward for who knows how long, because realistically speaking, as much as Americans complain about all this money that they're sending across to Ukraine, and people are saying, oh, it's embezzling, they need to keep those people busy. They need the warfare to continue as long as possible, so that they can try to hold on to as much power as possible. This is the whole point over the WHO, the World Health Organization treaty, which basically is run by America. It's run by American corporations. And those corporations will decide what constitutes a health crisis, where they can say, you need to lock down, you need to take this jab. This was, I wish I could find that clip. I could never find it. It was when Jen Psaki, right, the chick with the red hair, was in office before she quit. And she had said at one point during the height of the pandemic that America's goal was to be the number one vaccine salesman for C-19. And this was the whole point, that America wanted to use this as a way to exert control over all these other nations that were basically growing and becoming more powerful. And the only way that you can do that is you have to suppress these people economically. This is what goes on in Africa, where they give food aid to Africa And then that doesn't allow Africa to grow economically through agriculture, which is the beginning stages of economies. The most basic of economies is the agricultural phase, where you sell your food abroad. But when you have a country that is economically superior to you, just literally showering food into your country under the guise of food aid to help the poor, well, then the only thing they left is what they have is mining. And this is why you see a lot of deals doing kids and the blood diamonds and all this nonsense, because it's all that they have left, because they're limiting and stifling these countries. This is what happens with was it Sri Lanka? I think this is what happened with Sri Lanka, where they said, oh, you can't use natural gas, you can't use oil, you can't use fertilizer to grow your food. And then the country plunged into collapse economically. And the only reason that it was able to come out of that was because the people overwhelmingly rebelled and tried to kill the entire government, and the government had to flee the country. And this is what's going on globally. We're watching global economic warfare, and in countries where America can't invade, right? This is why America freely invades Middle Eastern countries, because they really can't put up a fight. They can steal their oil, which is going on right now. And they can bully other countries out of growing economically, so that in essence they have, as they say, a seat at the table. Because the only way that America is able to maintain this really high standard of living by comparison to all these other countries is they have to do it via force. They force these other countries into poverty. They force them to take the dollar. They force them to sell their goods at a cheaper price. It keeps the people impoverished. Overwhelmingly, the people are poor, but many of these countries are rich because they're either manufacturers or they have natural resources that are needed in the West. And the West uses economic warfare to keep these countries low. And just the new, drug of choice, the new weapon of choice is this virus. And it's going to be this way for who knows how long, because it worked. Because it worked the first time. And if the people don't just go along, well, then maybe we'll throw something out there that'll force the people to go along. And this is the reality of what is going on. It has nothing to do with a virus, and it has everything to do with maintaining power and authority to be able to keep your standard of living high. And most of these other European countries don't have the ability to fight back. It's like, shit, we might as well go along, even though we're in a subservient position, because at the very least we're gonna get a better standard of living than what goes on in many of these other countries, because we're just all aligning with the big boy in the room, and America is just basically eating up all the resources. This is why just look at it. America consumes something like 20% of all the Earth's natural resources annually. We don't produce that much. There's a small amount of people. It's like less than 4% of the global population, but yet they consume 3, 4, and 5 times the amount of resources. How? It's because this is what you get when you have global socialism, where America just basically dumps all this money onto the market. This is why you're hearing more about the debt, where they're saying, America, the debt, they downgrade the debt. Why would America's own institutions downgrade their own debt? Doesn't make any sense. What does it do to the price of the debt that they've already issued? If you've already released this debt in the form of treasuries onto the market, and then now your own institutions are saying, we might not be able to pay that we need to downgrade the debt. What does that do to the debt on the open market? It causes the debt to go down, the value of the debt. And so most of these countries put up this debt, these treasuries, as collateral. It's just like, for example, I do stock trading. I've been doing this for a long time, and I sell calls on the open market. And if I had the ability to, let's say I own Tesla, and then I sold calls on the shares of Tesla that I own at a specific price, right? And you reap all that money as income. And then I say, Tesla might have a bad quarter, or we're experiencing, because of the virus, where our sales are going to go down. What does that do to the price of Tesla? The price of Tesla goes down, but now my calls that I've sold, I can then buy them back at a cheaper price, or I just let them expire worthless. Now, of course, treasuries don't expire worthless. But what you can do is you can push down the cost, the price of those treasuries, the debt, and you reap 1,000 per treasury as an example. But then you drive the prices down for the treasuries that exist on the open market by issuing new treasuries at a higher rate. Now that collateral has gone down. You have to put up more capital because the collateral is now worth less on the open market. And this is basically what America has been doing. America has been waging economic warfare. And the virus was just a very nice tool to have in your pocket when you need it. And this is what you're going to see moving forward. You're probably going to see talks about how oil is going to come down, and America is going to experience deflation because the inflation is higher than America wants it. China has had a booming economy since they reopened. They've had 2 quarters of something like 4% and 6%, but America is gaslighting the shit out of the people, saying, "Oh, you better not invest in China. China's collapsing." It is what it is. They're just trying to stop new money from entering into China, and they're trying to bring the new money into their own country. Anyway, this video is getting super long. I'm going to leave it here. Thanks for watching. I'm heading out to breakfast. Let me know what your thoughts below about what's going on, and I'll check you next time.